It's been 80 years since the failed assassination plot to kill Adolf Hitler. Today, Germany is commemorating the uprising at the Resistance Memorial Center in Berlin. President Frank-Walter Steinmeier laid a wreath in memory of those involved in the attempted coup against the Nazi dictator on July 20th, 1944. And Chancellor Olaf Scholz said the resistance was a reminder not to resign in the face of history. Now, in a moment, I'll be speaking to the granddaughter of one of the central figures in the conspiracy against Hitler, known as Operation Valkyrie. But first, let's look at what happened 80 years ago today.
On July 20th, 1944, a daring plot to alter the course of history unfolded at Wolf's Lair, Adolf Hitler's headquarters located in what is present-day Poland. Colonel Klaus Schenk Graf von Stauffenberg, a family father and high-ranked officer in the German army, led an attempt to assassinate Hitler. Disillusioned by the atrocities of the Nazi regime, Stauffenberg and his co-conspirators planned Operation Valkyrie. Their objective was to kill Hitler, seize control of the government, and negotiate a peace deal with the Allies. On that day, Stauffenberg attended a meeting with Hitler, carrying a briefcase containing a bomb. He positioned the briefcase near Hitler. Shortly after Stauffenberg left the room, the device detonated. The explosion caused significant damage, but Hitler survived slightly injured. Someone had moved the suitcase, reducing the impact. Hours after the failed assassination, an impromptu court-martial sentenced Stauffenberg and several conspirators to death. They were executed the same night. Today, despite its failure, Stauffenberg's attempt to assassinate Hitler is remembered by many Germans as an act of resistance to the Nazi regime.
Joining me now is Elisabeth Ruger. She is a publisher and author and the granddaughter of Fritz Dietlof Graf von der Schulenburg. He was one of the central figures in the conspiracy against Hitler. After the failed assassination attempt, he was arrested and a few weeks later executed, as we just heard in the report. Hello, Elizabeth. Tell us more about your grandfather and his role in the plot.
Yeah, well, my grandfather actually had studied law and was a civil servant, but he was then in the military, and he came from a German aristocratic family that was very much involved in the military. So his main figure, he's often called the motor of the resistance, was to build a bridge between these various parts of society, the military, the civil society. He was friends with social democrats. He was one of the people who said we have to work with the communists. So he really decided we have to have this big undertaking. If the plot goes through, we have to make sure that we don't have civil war in Germany. So it was very important to get the workers and all kinds of social spheres behind the plot in the long run.
Right. So how would history have changed if your grandfather and other conspirators had been successful?
Well, I mean, for one thing, many people said, this came much too late, and these people were just sort of saving their own skins. They knew the war was over and wasn't going to be won. But millions of people actually died in the months afterwards. So one of the main things would have been that millions of lives could have been saved. Right,
yeah. How do you feel on a day like today when your grandfather and other members of the resistance are honored by the German chancellor and Germany's president?
I feel very happy. I feel we're living in a time where even our societies, our Western societies, are threatened. The democracy is threatened. I think that the people in the resistance can really be important for us to understand how we strengthen our democracy, how we go forward in a world that is a free world and a world that cherishes democracy.
Right. You're highlighting democracy. You talk about democracy being threatened. What lessons from the past can be learned by people facing tyranny today?
Well, I guess what lessons from the past, the main lesson is not to let tyrants take over, I would say. And we see that in many countries, there is a tendency to do away with democratic institutions, to give voters less and less rights, to figure out ways to manifest power in a way that is highly undemocratic. So I think the main lesson is that we hold on to a society that we have to make better in the future, but that offers the best kind of life for most people.
Right. What would you say has given rise to tyranny, right? Because that seems to be the norm almost in today's society, that the far right and tyranny is just rising wherever you look around the world. What do you think is giving rise to that?
Well, it is a backlash, I would say. There certainly is a backlash. I think that many people that might be regarded as minorities in society, even though very often, I'm thinking of women, for instance, one really can't say women are a minority, but many other people who are defined as such have been given more space, have been given more audibility in society, have been given more rights, and have been recognized. And I do think that for some people in far-right movements especially, this is threatening, and this is something they're trying to unravel. And I think those are the first steps towards something that can then turn into an authoritarian state and maybe in the long run into some kind of tyranny.
Right. Is there more that you believe democracies should do or can do to reduce tyranny around the world?
Yeah, well, I think, first of all, it's important to think of fairness when we're dealing with foreign countries, that we think of economic fairness, that we think when we're thinking of our green politics, of how many countries in other parts of the world are deeply exploited by our modes of trade. So I think that's one big step. The other step is that within the countries, we have to strengthen certain important legislation, and that is especially important for voting rights.
Right.
That, I think, is one of the main issues. So I think we just have to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to vote and that we have strong parliaments.
Right, right. Elizabeth Ruger, thank you very much for your time and insights.
Thank you for your interest.